All opinions and quotations in no way represent River West Radio and are the sole responsibility of the producer, guests, and callers. River West Radio is not liable for any legal issues arising from the content of breaking down the news.
You know why you're here, Mr. Wordsworth?
Yes, sir.
I'd ask you to speak up a little, if you will.
Yes, sir. I know why I am here.
You've been under investigation, Mr. Wordsworth, for the mandatory period of 1 year and 11 months. You're found to be obsolete. The purpose of this hearing is to make a finding in the matter and make a sentence accordingly. Do you understand that?
I understand that.
Your occupation, Mr.
A
Wordsworth?
radio talk show host.
What?
A radio talk show host, sir.
I'm told you've had counsel and been given orientation, Mr. Wordsworth, but I'm still not sure in my own mind that you understand the purpose of this hearing. The field investigators in your sector have classified you as obsolete. This finding carries with it serious implications. Do you understand that, Mr. Wordsworth? Now I ask you again, your occupation?
I am a radio talk show host. That is my occupation, my profession. If you people choose to call that obsolete...
Request clarification of the term? Yes, the term. Mr. Wordsworth, you people, you make reference to the state?
I make reference to the state.
And you persist in declaring your occupation, correct?
That is correct.
A minister. A minister would tell us that his function is that of preaching the word of God. And of course it follows that since the state has proven that there is no God, that would make the function of a minister somewhat academic as well.
There is a God.
You are in error, Mr. Wordsworth. There is no God. The state has proven that there is no God.
You cannot erase God with an edict.
You are obsolete, Mr. Wordsworth. You have no function, Mr. Wordsworth. You're an anachronism, like a ghost from another time.
I am nothing more than a reminder to you that you cannot destroy truth.
You're a bug, Mr. Wordsworth, a crawling insect, an ugly, misformed little creature who has no purpose here, no meaning.
I am a human being. I exist. And if I speak one thought out loud, that thought exists, even after I'm shoveled into my grave.
Delusions, Mr. Wordsworth. Delusions, the Bible, poetry, essays, all kind, all of it an opiate to make you think you have a strength when you have no strength at all. You have nothing but spindly limbs and a dream, and the state has no use for your kind.
Yeah? Well, we're gonna have to do something about that. This is RiverWestRadio.com, community-supported radio streaming live from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm your host. My name is Michael Wordsworth, and welcome to Breaking Down the News, the show that presents the news highlights of the week, but with a twist. Breaking Down the News is more concerned in bringing you information that wasn't covered on the front pages. Headlines you don't want to miss, because not listening could be dangerous to your freedom, liberty, and health. Thank you and welcome to the show on this Monday, July 30th, 2012. 2012, just plodding along here, halfway through the summer. Anything could happen. It's anyone's guess. But one wonders what Syrians are thinking as rebels vowing to free Syria take the country down the same road to destruction as rebels in Libya. Libya, under Gaddafi, a well-run country whose oil revenues were shared with the Libyan people instead of monopolized by a princely class as in Saudi Arabia, now has no government and is in disarray with contending factions vying for power. Just as no one knew who the Libyan rebels were, with elements of al-Qaeda reportedly among them, no one knows who the Syrian rebels are or indeed if they are even rebels. Some rebels appear to be bandit groups who seized the opportunity to loot and rape and set themselves up as governments of villages and towns. Others appear to be al-Qaeda. The fact that the rebels are armed is an indication of interference from outside. There have been reports that Washington has ordered its Saudi and Bahrain puppet governments to supply the rebels with military weaponry. Some suspect that the explosion that killed the Syrian defense minister and the head of the government's crisis operations was not the work of a suicide bomber, but the work of a U.S. drone or missile reminiscent of Washington's failed attempts to murder Saddam Hussein. Regardless, Washington regarded the terror attack as a success, declaring that it showed the rebels were gaining real momentum, and called on the Syrian government to respond to the attack by resigning. Just step down, they said. The following is from a leaked intelligence document describing a previous Western terrorist intervention in Syria, just in any case any reader is so naive as to think that our government would never do that. This from a globalresearch.ca, and I'm reading a quote here. In order to facilitate the action of liberative forces, that would be the Free Syrian Rebels, the ones that NATO and the UN is backing to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. Well, in order to facilitate the action of liberative forces, a special effort should be made to eliminate certain key individuals, to be accomplished early in the course of the uprising and intervention. You see, once a political decision has been reached to proceed with internal disturbances in Syria, CIA is prepared, and SIS, which is MI6, will attempt to mount minor sabotage and coup de main incidents within Syria, working through contacts with individuals. Incidents should not be concentrated in Damascus. Further, a necessary degree of fear, frontier incidents, and staged border clashes would provide a pretext for intervention. The CIA and the SIS, MI6 should use capabilities in both psychological and action fields to augment tension. This was from the joint U.S.-UK leaked intelligence document from both in London and Washington. Obama has not said why his government is so desperate to overthrow the Syrian government. The current president was an eye doctor in London who was brought back to Syria to replace his father, who had passed away, by the way, and he replaced him as the president of Syria. Washington is reticent about its real motives, which it masks with high-sounding humanitarian rhetoric, but Washington's motives are transparent. One motive is to get rid of the Russian naval base in Syria, thus depriving Russia of its only Mediterranean base. A second motive is to eliminate Syria as a source of arms and support to Hezbollah in order that Israel can succeed in its attempts to occupy southern Lebanon and acquire its water sources. Hezbollah's fighters have twice defeated the Israeli military's attempts to invade and occupy southern Lebanon. And yet a third move is to destroy the unity of Syria with sectarian conflict, as Washington destroyed Libya and Iraq and leaves Syria to warring factions to dismember the country, thus removing another obstacle to Washington's hegemony. Syria, a secular Arab state like Iraq, was and is ruled by a political party composed of Alawis, more or less Shia Muslims. The Alawis comprise about 12% of the Syrian population and are regarded as heretics by the Sunni Muslims, who comprise about 74% of the Syrian population. Thus, the orchestrated, quote, uprising appeals to many Sunnis who see the opportunity to take over. In Iraq, it was the Sunni minority that ruled a Shia majority, and in Syria, it's the exact opposite. Just flip that around. The divisions among Arabs, and that's too, that's why Iran is predominantly Shiite, and Shiite, it's spelled Shiite sometimes, but I believe it's pronounced Shia. They're predominantly Shia in Iran, and Iraq had predominantly Sunni. Well, the divisions among Arabs make Arabs vulnerable to Western interference and rule. The Sunni-Shia split makes it impossible for an Arab country to unite against an invader or for one Arab country to come to the aid of another. In 1990, the Shia Syrian government lined up with the U.S. against the Sunni Iraq government in the first Iraq war. Neither Lawrence of Arabia, Nasser, or Gaddafi succeeded in creating an Arab consciousness. Washington's cover for its violent overthrow of other governments is always moralistic verbiage. First, the target is demonized. Then Washington's naked aggression is described as, quote, bringing freedom and democracy overthrowing a brutal dictator, protecting women's rights. Any one of these could be the various reasons that Washington will walk into a country and presume to topple its current establishment. Any assortment of cards, words, phrases seems to work. Hillary Clinton has been especially strident in advocating the overthrow of the Syrian government. The silly woman even issued threats to Russia and China for daring to block Washington's attempt to use a UN resolution as covering for invading Syria. Washington misrepresents the Syrian government's resistance to being overthrown as a government conducting terror against its own people. But Washington had no condemnation for the terror attack, whether its own or that of a suicide bomber that killed high-level Syrian government officials. Washington's double standard prompted the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov to accuse Washington of having, quite frankly, a sinister position. Indeed, Washington does. But what is surprising about Washington's sinister position after Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Somalia, Yemen, let's not forget about Pakistan. Undoubtedly, after Syria is overthrown, Washington will move on to Iran. Russia itself is already being surrounded by U.S. missile bases, and the Russian government has a disloyal and traitorous political opposition financed by American money. China is confronting a rapid buildup of U.S. air, naval, and troop bases in the Pacific. How long before China's government has a disloyal opposition financed by Washington? The hegemon is on the march, but what Syrian Sunnis see is a chance to overthrow the Alawite Shia. The Syrian Sunnis will ally with Washington despite the fact that Washington overthrew the Iraq Sunnis. Few Arabs, it seems, mind being puppets of a foreign regime that hands out billions of dollars. Washington loosely refers to Syrian President Assad as a dictator or a brutal dictator. But obviously, if Assad is a dictator, he's not very effective in that role. Normally, dictators don't permit an opposition to rise, much less harm itself. It would be more accurate to say that the ruling party is authoritarian, but the ruling party has introduced elements of democracy with the new constitution. As Iraq has proved, Arab governments have to be authoritarian if their Sunni and Shia populations are not to be constantly engaged in civil war. Both Bush and Obama claim that Washington brought freedom and democracy to Iraq. However, the ongoing violence in Iraq is as intense or more intense than under the American occupation. Here's some recent reports for the last 3 days. On July 23rd, a wave of bomb attacks and shootings at Baghdad and north of the capital has killed at least 107 people. At least 216 were wounded. On July 24th, a second day of intensified attacks left at least 145 Iraqis killed and 379 more wounded. And on July 25th, attacks continued across Iraq, 17 killed, 60 wounded. This is what Washington did for Iraq. Far from bringing freedom and democracy, Washington brought endless mayhem and death. And this is precisely what Washington is in the process of bringing to Syria. I only hope to bring your attention to these issues, and maybe public opinion will sway. Maybe it'll turn. All we can do here is report the news. I'm Michael Wordsworth with Words Worth Listening To. We'll be right back.
You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com.
Every day, people wake up all over the world and hear commercials like this one with soft music and a soothing announcer's voice telling you how great some big corporation's new technology will help you and your family. But it is important to remember, these companies could give a flying fuck about you or your family. That's why Breaking Down the News has made this commercial to counter their commercials. Don't be fooled by them. The battle is to gain control of your mind through media propaganda. Just say no to evil corporations and their slick computer graphics designed to brainwash viewers. Vote no with your dollars, and we will regain the health of our nation, one consumer at a time.
And now it is time to make light of the issues.
War criminals. I mean, we used to hunt down war criminals, put them on trial, and have them executed. Today, you have so many war criminals running around today. You've got Kissinger, George Bush, Barack Obama. All these guys should be put on trial. George Bush can't even go to Switzerland anymore. I'm telling you, they wanted to arrest him. But in America, it's just, yeah.
You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com.
Breaking down the news as reported on the LIBOR scandal recently, actually last week. LIBOR is the London interbank offering rate. The scandal basically, in a nutshell, was that lower rates were offered to inside members while the public and businesses paid more. It goes a lot deeper than that, but we'd like to put this whole scandal into perspective today, if I might. The article about the LIBOR scandal, which was co-authored by Naomi Prinz, received much attention with internet repostings, foreign translation, and video interviews. To further clarify the situation, that article brings to the forefront implications that might not be obvious to those without insider experience and knowledge. The price of Treasury bonds is supported by the Federal Reserve's large purchases. Okay, let me say that again. The price of Treasury bonds is supported by the Federal Reserve's large purchases. The Federal Reserve's purchases are often misread as demand arising from a flight to quality due to concern about the EU sovereign debt problem and possible failure of the euro. Another rationale used to explain the demand for treasuries despite their negative yield is the flight to safety. A 2% yield on a treasury bond is less of a negative interest rate than the yield of a few basis points on a bank CD, and the U.S. government, unlike banks, can use its central bank to print the money to pay off its debts. It is possible that some investors purchase treasuries for these reasons. However, the safety and flight to quality explanations cannot exist if interest rates were rising or were expected to rise. The Federal Reserve prevents the rise in interest rates and the decline in bond prices, which normally result from continually issuing new debt in enormous quantities at negative interest rates. By announcing this, it has a low interest rate policy and will purchase bonds to keep bond prices high. Without that Fed policy, there could be no flight to safety or quality. It's the prospect of ever lower interest rates that causes investors to purchase bonds that do not pay a real rate of interest. Bond purchasers make up for the negative interest rate by the rise in price in the bonds caused by the next round of low interest rates. As the Federal Reserve and the banks drive down the interest rate, the issued bonds rise in value and their purchasers enjoy capital gains. As the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England are themselves fixing interest rates at historic lows in order to mask the insolvency of their respective banking systems, they naturally do not object that the banks themselves contribute to the success of this policy by fixing the LIBOR rate and by selling massive amounts of interest rates swaps, a way of shorting interest rates and driving them down or preventing them from rising through swaps. The lower LIBOR is, the higher is the price or evaluations of floating rate debt instruments, such as CDOs, and thus the stronger the bank's balance sheets appear. Does this mean that the U.S. and the U.K. financial systems can only be kept afloat by fraud that harms purchasers of interest rate swaps, which include municipalities advised by sellers of interest rate swaps and those with savings accounts? Well, the answer is yes, but the LIBOR scandal is only a small part of the interest rate rigging scandal. The Federal Reserve itself has been rigging interest rates. How else could debt issued in profusion be bearing negative interest rates? As villainous as they might be, Barclays Bank Chief Executive Bob Diamond, Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan, and Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs are not the main villains. The main villains are former Treasury Secretary and Goldman Sachs chairman Robert Rubin, R-U-B-I-N, who pushed Congress for the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act and the sponsors of the Graham-Leach-Bliley bill, which repealed the Glass-Steagall Act. Glass-Steagall was put in place in 1933 in order to prevent the kind of financial excesses that produced the current ongoing financial crisis. President Clinton's Treasury Secretary, then Robert Rubin, presented the removal of all constraints on financial chicanery as financial modernization. Taking restraints off of banks was part of the hubristic response to the end of history. Capitalism had won the struggle with socialism and communism. Vindicated capitalism no longer needed its concessions to social welfare and regulations that capitalism used in order to compete with socialism. The constraints on capitalism could now be thrown off. Because markets were self-regulating, as Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan, among many, declared, it was financial deregulation, the repeal of Glass-Steagall, the removal of limits on debt leverage, the absence of regulation of OTC derivatives, the removal of limits on speculative positions in future markets that caused the ongoing financial crisis. No doubt but that J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and others were after maximum profits by hook or crook any way they could get it, but their opportunity came from the neoconservative triumphalism of democratic capitalism's historic victory over alternative socio-political economic systems. The ongoing crisis cannot be addressed without restoring the laws and regulations that were repealed and discarded. And there's no point in going any further from this point on. If it's not enough. We got a finger in the dike, but I'm telling you, we got to fix the dike itself. It's broke. Putting Humpty Dumpty back together. He fell. He's in a bunch of pieces. And to do so is an enormous task of its own perils. The financial concentration that deregulation fostered has left us with broken financial institutions that are too big to fail. To understand the fullness of the problem, consider the lawsuits that are expected to be filed against the banks that fixed the LIBOR rate by those who were harmed by the fraud. Some are saying that as the fraud was known by the central banks and not reported, that the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England should be indicted for their participation in the fraud. What follows is not an apology for fraud. It merely describes consequences of holding those responsible accountable. Imagine the Federal Reserve called before Congress or the Department of Justice to answer why it did not report on the fraud perpetuated by private banks, fraud that was supporting the Federal Reserve's own rating of interest rates, and the same in the UK. The Federal Reserve would reply, so you want us to let interest rates go up? Are you prepared to come up with the money to bail out the FDIC-insured depositors of J.P. Morgan, Chase, Bank of America, Citibank, Wells Fargo? The government would tell us, are you prepared for U.S. Treasury prices to collapse, wiping out bond funds and the remaining wealth in the U.S. and driving up interest rates, making the interest rates on new federal debt necessary to finance the huge budget deficits impossible now to pay, and finishing off what is left of the real estate market? Are you prepared to take responsibility, you who would regard the financial system for this economic Armageddon? Well, obviously the politicians will say no, continue with the fraud, and not much will change. The harm to people from collapse far exceeds the harm in lost interest from fixing the low interest rates in order to forestall collapse. The Federal Reserve will say that we are doing our best to create profits for the banks that will permit us eventually to unwind the fraud and return to normal. Congress will see no better alternative to this, but the question remains, how long can the regime of negative interest rates continue while debt explodes upward? Currently, everyone in the U.S. who counts, and most who don't have an interest in holding off Armageddon, no one wants to tip over the boat. If the banks are sued for damages and the lack of the money to pay, the Federal Reserve can create the money for the banks to pay. If the collapse of the system does not result from scandals, it will come from the outside. The dollar is the world reserve currency. This means that the dollar's exchange value is boosted despite the dismal economic outlook in the U.S. by the fact that as the currency for settling international accounts, there's international demand for the dollar. Country A, for example, settles its trade deficit with country B in dollars. Country B settles its account with country C in dollars, and so on throughout the countries of the world. For whatever reason, perhaps to curtail their accumulation of suspect dollars or to bring Washington's power to an end, the BRICS, the countries known as BRICS, BRICS, which would include Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, these countries are agreeing to settle their trade between themselves in their own currencies, thus abandoning the use of the dollar. I mean, do you hear what I'm saying there? This means this would affect our demand for the American dollar as a currency worldwide. They wouldn't need it to trade. And if we lose our dependence on the petrodollar, which bolsters our economy very high, that would be a problem. Well, according to reports, China and Japan, they've reached an agreement to settle their trade between themselves in their own currencies. I read last week, I believe it was on Monday's show, 11 trade agreements that do not bode well for the United States. The moves away from the dollar as the currency of international transactions means that the dollar's exchange value will fall as the demand for dollars falls. Whereas the Federal Reserve can create dollars with which to purchase the Treasury's debt, thus preventing a fall in bond prices, the Federal Reserve cannot prop up the dollar's exchange value by creating more dollars with which to purchase dollars. Dollars would have to be taken off the foreign exchange market by purchasing them with other currencies. But in order to have these currencies, the U.S. would have to be running a trade surplus, not a long-term trade deficit. In the short run, the Federal Reserve could arrange currency swap agreements in which, say, foreign central banks swap their currencies for dollars in order to supply the Federal Reserve with currencies with which to soak up dollars. However, only a limited number of swaps could be negotiated before foreign central banks understood that the dollar's fall in value is not a temporary event that could be propped up with currency swaps, as the value of the dollar will fall as countries move away from its use as reserve currency. The values of dollar-denominated assets will also fall. The Federal Reserve, even with full cooperation from the banking system employing every fraud technique known, cannot prevent interest rates from rising on debt instruments denominated in a currency whose value is falling. Think about it this way. A person, fund, or institution owns bonds or any debt instruments carrying a negative rate of interest, but continues to hold the instruments because interest rates, despite the increase in debt, are creeping down, raising bond prices and producing capital gains in the bonds. What happens when the exchange value of the currency in which the debt instruments are denominated falls? Can the price of the bond stay high enough even though the value of the currency in which the bond is denominated is declining? The drop in the exchange value of the currency hits the bond prices in a second way. Thank you. I needed that sip of coffee. A lot of talking this afternoon. Well, the drop, the decline in exchange value of the currency would affect the bond price in another manner. The price of imports rise, and this pushes up prices. The inflation measures will show higher inflation. How long will people hold debt instruments paying negative interest rates as inflation rises? Perhaps there are historical cases in which bond prices continue to rise indefinitely or even hold firm as inflation rises or rose, but I've never heard of them. And the Federal Reserve can create money. Theoretically, the Federal Reserve's prop-up schemes could continue until the Federal Reserve owns all dollar-denominated financial assets, essentially buying up all its debt. And that would cover the holes in its own balance sheet. The Federal Reserve could just print more money, I guess. Some suspect that the Federal Reserve, in order to forestall a declining dollar and thus declining prices of dollar-denominated financial instruments, is behind the sales of naked shorts every time demand for physical bullion drives up the price of gold and silver. The short sales, paper sales, the short sales of paper sales, literally paper sales, cancel the impact on price of the increased demand for bullion. There's always a correlation. Some also believe that they see the Federal Reserve's hand in the stock market. One day stocks fall 200 points. The next day stocks rise 200 points. This up and down pattern has been going on for a long time. I've seen it since 2008, right after the first collapse. One possible explanation is that as wary investors sell their equity holdings, the Federal Reserve or the plunge protection team steps in and buys. Just as the terrorist threat was used to destroy the laws that protect U.S. civil liberty, the financial crisis has resulted in the Federal Reserve moving far outside its charter in normal operating behavior, exceeding those bounds, infringing on our territory, so to speak. Well, to sum up, what has happened is that the irresponsible and thoughtless, in fact, ideological deregulation of the financial sector has caused a financial crisis that could only be managed by fraud. Civil damages might be paid, but to halt the fraud itself would mean the collapse of the financial system it serves. Isn't that fascinating? Boy, we're in it now. Those in charge of the system would prefer the collapse to come from outside, such as from a collapse in the value of the dollar that could be blamed on foreigners, because an outside cause gives them something to blame other than themselves. It's a lot to think about. If you don't know about the Glass-Steagall Act, I urge you to research, look into it. I'm Michael Wordsworth. These have been Wordsworth listening to. We're headed up. We're at the top of the hour right now. We're here Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 3:30 to 5, 3:30 to 6 on Fridays. If you'd like to call in today, feel free. The number and phone lines are open, 414-935-2951. I'll be right back after these messages.
You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com.
Are you tired of commercials always telling you that you're tired when you know you're tired because you wake up early and go to bed late, and every moment in between is spent trying to figure out how you're going to make the next dollar? Well, you're not alone. Millions of Americans are walking around in a sleep-deprived, zombie-like state, amplified by psych meds and pharmaceuticals found in the drinking water. So just be glad you're not one of them, unless you are, in which case I'm sorry you had to hear this. But wait, there's more. If we keep at this current pace, we will surely lose our democratic republic and soon be standing in food lines for the poisonous rations the new totalitarian government will hand out. Don't delay, get involved, get informed.
The FBI headquarters is a huge modern building in the middle of downtown. Cars and trucks drive past the front entrance on this very active street, and these doors will lead us to the elevators that will take us to the office of Deputy Director Hank Polarank.
Welcome to the FBI headquarters. Can I help you?
Yes, I have an appointment with Deputy Director Polarank.
And your name is?
Michael Wordsworth from RiverWestRadios.com, breaking down the news show.
Michael who? No.
The staff at the FBI was professional and courteous as they greeted me, and after a few security complications were smoothed out, I was soon able to get in to do my interview. Michael Wordsworth from Breaking Down the News.
Hey, come on in, take a seat.
And it was an interesting interview. How many terrorist plots has the FBI foiled in the last few years?
We've been busy, very busy with ongoing investigations. It's hard to say off the top of my head. 10, maybe 12?
And out of those 10 or 12 incidents, how many of those were not terrorist plots instigated by the FBI?
None actually.
Not one.
Well, the underwear bomber, that wasn't us.
But it came to light that the underwear bomber was forced onto the plane by a well-dressed man, and he didn't go through security. That wasn't the FBI.
No. Might have been Secret Service. I think they handled that one.
I'd like to quote an article from the New York Times. Can I?
Sure, go ahead.
This is an article by David K. Shipler, published April 29, 2012, and I quote, "But all these dramas were facilitated by the FBI, whose undercover agents and informers posed as terrorists offering a dummy missile, fake C4 explosives, a disarmed suicide vest, and rudimentary training. Suspects naively played their parts until they were arrested. When an Oregon college student, Mohammed Osman Mohammed, thought of using a car bomb to attack a festive Christmas tree lighting ceremony in Portland,
The FBI provided a van loaded with 55-gallon drums of inert material, harmless blasting caps, a detonator cord, and a gallon of diesel fuel to make the van smell flammable. An undercover FBI agent even did the driving, with Mr. Muhammad in the passenger seat.
Yeah.
To trigger the bomb, the student punched a number into a cell phone and got no boom, only a bust. What do you say to that?
What's your point?
My point is it sounds like we really don't have a terrorism problem in America beyond those plots the FBI makes up itself.
What? How did you get in here? Agent Smith.
Be right in.
What is it, sir? Hey, wait. How did you get in here? I don't believe this. He doesn't have clearance, sir. You'll have to come with me.
He doesn't have clearance? How did he get past you?
He snuck in here when I went to pay for the pizza delivery. I was there for a while. I wanted exact change.
Okay, hey, thanks for the interview. That's all I need now.
Sir, stop. Come back here.
He doesn't have clearance?
Thank you. Talk soon. You guys take care.
Security, we have a gate jumper headed for the elevators.
And whereas this interview did not yield all the answers I wanted, I did get to state my point. And as I was leaving the FBI building, I had the realization that making my point was worth the trip. When you're out on the road, you want to know them tires are touching the pavement. You want rubber to concrete. When you're out there, you want to drive knowing that you're in control of the wheel. But what about your government? Don't you think your government should have its reality check and the rubber hit the pavement? What's going to put the brakes on the rampant fiscal spending, budget problems? It's not the voter, it's not the constituents, it won't be the leaders. The problem ain't the leaders, it's the followers. Get behind the wheel, America. Natural and organic meat shopping is on the rise. Consumers are waking up. Sometimes we Americans can be a little stubborn, a little too prideful or provincial when it comes to change. But slowly, surely Americans are finally getting it when it comes to natural and organic foods, and we're buying more of them. New consumer research shows that while some grocery spending has fallen in recent months, shoppers are increasing their spending on organic meat and poultry, and that's increased for the first time in years. The report, called the 2012 Power of Meat, is the 7th annual study of consumption trends conducted by the American Meat Institute, Food Marketing Institute, and Sealed Air's Cryovac Food Packaging Division. The report explores consumer perception and buying habits, attitudes, and behaviors regarding fresh meat and poultry. Cooking habits improving, sales are up. For this year, the industry group surveyed 1,340 people in November 2011. A number of topics were explored, including consumption and purchasing patterns, nutrition, marketing techniques, consumer interest in organic and natural meat, packaging, and labeling. Among the group's findings, Americans are buying fewer groceries as a way to reduce overall spending. The annual study found that of the shoppers who spent less for groceries last year, 45% reduced spending by just buying fewer items. That's nearly the same as the share of people who reduced their spending by using coupons, lists, and buying private label products. Also, the report found natural and organic meat and poultry purchases increased for the first time in many years. In fact, natural and organic poultry markets managed to attract new customers after several years of flat sales. The report said 24% of shoppers said they bought natural and or organic meat and poultry in the 3 months preceding the study, an increase of 20% from the previous year. Consumers are also improving their cooking habits. The report said consumers were frying less food and slow cooking more, which, by the way, is also a calorie reducer. Over the past half-decade, the trend of frying less has steadily increased. There has been a 22% decline in frying as a way to prepare meals. Meanwhile, the use of slow cookers, crock pots, and ovens in meal preparation has spiked 12% over the same time frame. Price, county of origin, and content mattering more to the public. According to these reports, following the recession of 2008-2010 and the resultant stagnant economy, household income has definitely influenced the purchase of meat and poultry. The report noted that household income, in fact, directly influenced the frequency by which meat and poultry was consumed. As you might have imagined, shoppers who had a drop in income tended to eat less meat and poultry, an average of 3.8 meals per week versus 4 times per week in households that experienced no loss of income. The report says slightly more than half, 51% to be precise, 51% of shoppers checked processed meat ingredients for sodium content, which was the first time the level exceeded 50%, indicating shoppers may be starting to show more concern for their own health, a good sign considering America's expanding waistlines and higher than normal levels of heart disease. Some 28% of shoppers said they would buy more meat and poultry if it were packaged in environmentally friendly wraps and containers, even if it increased the cost of the product somewhat. I would tend to agree. I would be more than happy to pay more if it did more to help the environment, truly, an actual real green movement. 49% said they would only do so if there was no price difference. The report also noted that awareness of country of origin and county of origin is both very important, and awareness of them rose nearly 40%, which was up from 33% in 2011. It's a 7% increase of people caring that much more about food labeling, where it comes from, what you're actually eating. But that had little reported influence of whether or not consumers decided to purchase those items if U.S. meat or poultry was higher. I mean, we have to wait to see. There's a lot of talk about the corn famine right now. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have called it the corn famine. Pardon me, there's no corn famine. I apologize greatly. I, of course, was referring to the drought that is hitting America, that is affecting corn crop production in many, many areas. Some have reported to me that many areas are doing fine as well, that perhaps, once again, it's difficult to discern how impacting this corn will be. Will it be a crisis or not? It's very hard to say at this point. Those that have said that this will affect the corn market, it wouldn't be noticed in fall that I guess they're still eating last year's corn. I'm not sure, or from a previous season. Let's put it that way. And that looking into the middle of winter was when you would see the corn price problem rear its ugly head. But then that's not a given either. It's hard to say. I mean, so what are you going to do? I mean, this is what speculators, commodity buyers, and brokers, they have to deal with these questions. It's a lot different when you put your money on the line to answer them. Indeed. I'm Michael Wordsworth. We're going to take a 2-second break here. Come right back. More news about food. Nothing wrong with food, is there? Food's very important to humanity. We need food. Food is a good, enjoyable thing. Be right back.
You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com. The kitchen is the heart of the home, but at Monsanto, we're a megalithic agricultural group attempting to destroy farmers all across your country. We bring you horrible foods that attack your stomach lining, DNA, give you kidney and liver failure. Monsanto, bringing Franken foods to your family at home. Don't you just hate us? Say no to GMO.
And now it is time to make light of the issues.
Economists, that's right, economists. You know they're about the most useless thing. they're paid to be wrong 2/3 of the time. And I'm telling you, our economy, they keep telling us our economy is getting better, right? Right? I mean, what a joke. It's like Hitler reporting back to the German people that he's winning the war. Isn't it? Isn't it? I mean, just look at the jobs market right now. It's just ridiculous, huh? We must be having a jobless recovery. A jobless recovery. You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com. Monsanto defrauded GM cornfield workers, new lawsuit claims. This article by Ethan A. Huff, staff writer for naturalnews.com. Monsanto, the most evil corporation in the world, is the subject of yet another lawsuit in which plaintiffs claim the agro-giant lied to them and ripped them off. Courthouse News Services reports that Monsanto recently recruited several agricultural workers in Texas with promises of high pay and free housing, but instead tricked them into working for pittance, pennies, nada, zip, and living in substandard housing equivalent to that found in third world countries. Jose Cardenas and several others say that back in 2010, they were recruited for agricultural work near the Texas border town of McAllen by a company known to be as Milo Inc., which was in cahoots with Monsanto. Cardenas and at least 7 others were told that if they agreed to work in Monsanto's genetically modified cornfields in Indiana, they would receive free housing with kitchens and would be paid $80 per acre for detasseling this Franken corn. The workers were also told that if they agreed to weed the fields in addition to removing the pollen-producing flowers from the tops of corn plants, they would receive an additional cash bonus. According to the lawsuit, Milo Inc., President Hermilo Cantu Jr., working on behalf of Monsanto, basically promised Cardenas and others the world, which convinced them to agree to the promised terms and relocate to Indiana. But when Cardenas and the other plaintiffs arrived in Indiana, the free housing they were promised turned out to be rundown motel rooms that did not comply with substantive federal and state safety and health standards applicable to agricultural labor housing. The kitchens also turned out to be an old school bus that had been outfitted with makeshift stoves and a few refrigerators. The school bus did not have proper lighting or ventilation and did not have enough tables and chairs to accommodate all the workers, alleges the lawsuit. Rather than be free as promised, however, the substandard third world style housing actually ended up costing Cardenas and the others $300 apiece per room. And instead of receiving the $80 per acre they were each promised for detasseling this Frankenfood corn, that GMO monstrosity produced by Monsanto, well, the plaintiffs say they were paid a rate that, when divided among crew members, was less than minimum wage. Cardenas is seeking damages under the Agricultural Production Act, as well as unpaid wages under the Fair Labor Standards Act. They are being represented by Catherine Blair Craddock with Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid. Good luck, gentlemen. Monsanto is known for operating corrupt slave labor plantations across America. If you're an immigrant worker, be leery of Monsanto. Be leery of Milo Inc., which seems to be doing the bidding of Monsanto. I'm Michael Wordsworth, bringing you Wordsworth listening to. You're listening to Breaking Down the News on...
You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com.
And now it is time to make light of the issues.
The world doesn't make sense. It's never going to make sense. Take abortion, for example. Just another one of those issues that we're always being preoccupied with. But isn't the solution pretty much evident? Let's just make a law legalizing abortion. That's right, just legalize abortion. And in how many generations will it take before those who decided to kill their babies don't have enough people to populate versus those who decided to keep and raise their babies? Doesn't the problem just solve itself? You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com. White House chef says future food to be made from chemicals, not real food ingredients. This article also by Ethan A. Huff, staff writer for naturalnews.com. Every 2 years, a consortium of Europe's most active minds converges at the Euroscience Open Forum to discuss the latest advancements in scientific research and innovation. But this year's meeting, which was held in Dublin, Ireland, featured a disturbing workshop held by White House executive pastry chef Bill Yassis, who explained and demonstrated to audience members how the food of the future will not actually contain real food, but rather various combinations of lab-created chemicals that mimic food. As reported on 6-1 News, a feature of RTE News in Ireland, Yassis and several other food experts showed a live audience how to create various foams, gels, solids, and other food-like textured substances out of chemicals that, when combined, reassemble things like lemon souffle and chocolate pudding. These food scientists then shared samples of these laboratory creations with audience members who were told that the imitation food products are the wave of the future. That's not a future I want to go into. Said Herb, there's many people. White House executive pastry chef Bill Yassis is spelled Y-O-S-S-E-S. Spelled Y. Shares a similar sentiment as he believes creating fake food out of chemicals will actually help improve the quality of cuisine and availability of food. He told 6-1 News that chefs can use the information he presented to gain a better understanding of what they're doing and use that to improve the processes, to improve not only the flavor but the hygiene, the longevity of how to store things. Can you believe this? I mean, honestly, food being replaced by chemicals. This is not a future I want to go to. I don't know. I mean, do we really get to make these decisions? That's what I'd like to think, that we have some small part in this, but really, if this is the great, glorious food they want to go to in the future? Not me, buddy. Not me. I'm going to take a break here, come right back. I'm Michael Wordsworth. Wordsworth listening to. You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com. The kitchen is the heart of the home, but at Monsanto, we're a megalithic agricultural group attempting to destroy farmers all across your country. We bring you horrible foods that attack your stomach lining, DNA, give you kidney and liver failure. Monsanto, bringing Franken foods to your family at home. Don't you just hate us? Say no to GMO. You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com. It's like the roaring 20s all over again. The stock markets are well above 12,000. It's as if nothing could go wrong, or could it? The truth is, the American economy is not as strong as it actually appears. The job reports for June were down, manufacturing down. The actual CPI rate, if you adjusted it correctly, would show that unemployment is at a staggering 22%. 46 million Americans are on food stamps, and guess who runs that program? Not the government, no, Goldman Sachs. I'm telling you, the situation here is more abrupt than we think. Wake up, America. We have hard times coming. And we need to prepare for what lies ahead. U.S. proxy al-Qaeda death squads in Syria
This article by Stefan Lenman from slenman.blogspot.com on July 30th, 2012. Washington's agenda involves death and squad diplomacy. Evidence mounting proves it. It's standard practice in all U.S. direct and proxy wars, and that's how America treats its enemies. Massacres and unspeakable atrocities are committed. Women are raped. Civilians are treated like combatants. They're indiscriminately killed. Others are targeted for opposing U.S. aggression. Children are harmed like adults. Prisoners are tortured. No crimes too gruesome to commit. Lies, duplicity, and cover-up follow. Media scoundrels bear direct responsibility. Their hands are like the blood-stained U.S. officials, the forces that kill through proxy killers. Vietnam's Operation Phoenix became a prototype for today's wars and included intimidation, kidnappings, torture, mass murder. At issue was eliminating opposition elements. Terrorizing people into submission was policy. Southeast Asia tactics are replicated in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and Syria. Barbarism defines U.S. policy. On July 11th, German writer Jürgen Todenhofer confirmed the presence of al-Qaeda insurgents in Syria. He met with them. This according to Jürgen. He said he holds them and others like them responsible for mass terror attacks. He described a massacre marketing strategy. He called it, quote, among the most disgusting things that I've ever experienced in an armed conflict. He added that Western media distort what's happening on the ground. Viewers and readers know it's their stock and trade. They're paid to lie. Journalists dedicated to truth and full disclosure need not apply anymore. On July 24th, Asia Times writer John Rosenthal headlined, German intelligence, Al-Qaeda all over Syria. This report from the Asia Times says German intelligence estimates that around 90 terror attacks that could be attributed to organizations that are close to Al-Qaeda or jihadist groups were carried out in Syria between the end of December and the beginning of July, as reported by the German daily newspaper Die Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, or FAZ for short. Die Welt and Bild published similar reports. All three name Al-Qaeda behind the May 25th Hula massacre. Russian journalist Marat Musin was there. He said hundreds of bandits and mercenaries were responsible for this act. Washington's imperial tactics involve cutthroat killer atrocities. Human lives have no value. Only wealth, privilege, and dominance matter. U.S. officials don't keep body counts. Objectives are pursued lawlessly. Rosenthal cited Die Welt contributor Alfred Haxenberger, told it was part of Syria's Hula region. Insurgents controlled it for months, said Haxenberger. They bear responsibility for Hula killings. He visited the area. He interviewed an eyewitness. He left him unidentified for his safety. He was at Kara's St. James Monastery. Victims were pro-Assad Sunnis, according to him. Many people know what happened, but won't say out of fear for their lives. Whoever says something can only repeat the rebels' version. Anything else is certain death. I'm Michael Wordsworth, giving you the inside scoop on Syria, attempting to counter the propaganda being put out by the media here and the government. I can only bring you the information that I get. I'll be right back.
You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com. Are you tired of commercials always telling you that you're tired? When you know you're tired because you wake up early and go to bed late, and every moment in between is spent trying to figure out how you're going to make the next dollar. Well, you're not alone. Millions of Americans are walking around in a sleep-deprived, zombie-like state, amplified by psych meds and pharmaceuticals found in the drinking water. So just be glad you're not one of them, unless you are, in which case I'm sorry you had to hear this. But wait, there's more. If we keep at this current pace, we will surely lose our democratic republic and soon be standing in food lines for the poisonous rations the new totalitarian government will hand out. Don't delay. Get involved. Get informed.
And now it is time to make light of the issues.
War criminals. I mean, we used to hunt down war criminals, put them on trial, and have them executed. Today, you have so many war criminals running around today. You've got Kissinger, George Bush, Barack Obama. All these guys should be put on trial. George Bush can't even go to Switzerland anymore. I'm telling you, they wanted to arrest him. But in America, it's just, yeah. You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com. This is a special Breaking Down the News celebrity call-in segment where we have known political figures call in and conduct an interview. Today's guest, he was once the National Security Advisor under Nixon during the Vietnam War era, and later Secretary of State. He's probably the most prominent unindicted war criminal roaming around today. I'd like to bring onto the show Mr. The Bloodstains Won't Come Off My Hands no matter how hard I scrub them, Kissinger. Welcome to the show, you evil bloodthirsty monster.
Good afternoon, Michael. Thank you for having me on your show.
Now, you've managed to really piss off a lot of people during your long career as a warmonger hiding in sheep's clothing.
I really have. If I had a conscience, this would really bother me. The illegal, we do immediately. The unconstitutional takes a little longer.
I'm not sure what the hell that means, but you were once a big man in foreign affairs throughout the world, and I bet it's hard to get on anyone's show these days, since people have been rightfully charging you as a war criminal.
The nice thing about being a celebrity is that if you bore people, they think it's your fault. Actually, I make a few public appearances now and then. I was recently honored at the conference on Indochina.
What?
I know. It is ironic, isn't it?
Wait. Let me get this straight. You, the man who, along with Richard Holbrooke, was part of the team in the Nixon White House, helping to craft the Vietnam policy, including Operation Phoenix, which saw the assassination of South Vietnamese political and religious leaders. You are attending this conference.
A country that demands moral perfection in its foreign policy will achieve neither perfection nor security.
But you, Mr. The Bloodstains Won't Come Off My Hands no matter how hard I scrub them, Kissinger, authorized the war to bleed over into Cambodia. The terrible consequence was the eventual rise of Pol Pot and the Cambodian killing fields, and now they invite you to a conference on Indochina hosted by Hillary Clinton?
Imagine my chagrin. Ha, 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 ha. Hillary Clinton had to introduce me, which wasn't easy, given her rude comments about me prior to the conference.
Oh, come on. She was just probably covering her own tush. You know she worships at the same altar of death that you do.
Perhaps, but it was ironic that she had to introduce me. Ha, ha, ha.
Now, in recent years, Mr. The Bloodstains Won't Come Off My Hands no matter how hard I scrub them, Kissinger, you have come under fire for private comments once made to Nixon during the Bangladesh-Pakistani war, in which you described the then Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi as a, quote, bitch and a witch.
I regret that now.
What, saying that?
No, getting caught saying that. I regret that now.
You also said the Indians are bastards shortly before the war.
I did. What are you going to do, you know?
It's kind of surreal with the coup attempt in Ecuador that this harkens back to your policies in Latin America. which saw the overthrow and murder of Salvador Allende in Chile, and your prompting of Operation Condor in the Plan Mercurio, which oversaw the kidnapping of peoples in Latin American countries, leftist activists, these people were disappeared under Operation Condor, and now we have Hillary Clinton praising you for this evil well done.
It's not a matter of what is true that counts, but a matter of what is perceived to be true.
Do you see a parallel between Vietnam and Afghanistan today?
The war profits must flow unabated. Military men are just dumb, stupid animals to be used as pawns in foreign policy.
I can't believe you just said that.
Well, I said it before, and I will say it again. Here, I will say it again right now. Military men are just dumb, stupid animals to be used as pawns in foreign policy.
Mr. Kissinger, you are indeed a madman. It is hard to believe that you played such a pivotal role in our country's foreign policy for decades, and that is all the time I will lend to your madness. You're out of here.
It was a pleasure being on your show, Michael. Good day.
And good riddance. I am Michael Wordsworth, having just interviewed Henry, the bloodstains won't come off my hands no matter how hard I scrub them, Kissinger. Back in a moment. All opinions and quotations in no way represent River West Radio and are the sole responsibility of the producer, guests, and callers. River West Radio is not liable for any legal issues arising from the content of this program. Oregon criminalizes permaculture, claims state ownership over all rainwater ponds and swales restricted, jail time for violators. This article from Mike Adams in Natural News. There's nothing more refreshing than standing in a cool summertime rain shower, or bathing in the warm sunlight on a crisp spring day, or inhaling the cool autumn air fresh with the scent of turning leaves and pine needles. These things, rainwater, sunlight, air, have long been assumed to not only be free, but unclaimable. You can't claim to own the sunlight that falls on my front yard, for example. A corporation can't claim intellectual property ownership over the air that you breathe and demand you pay for a royalty for inhaling. But today, Jackson County, Oregon says it owns your rainwater, and the county has sentenced a man to 30 days in jail and fined him over $1,500 for the supposed crime of collecting rainwater on his own property. The man's name is Gary Harrington, and he owns over 170 acres of land in Jackson County. On that land, he has 3 ponds, and those ponds collect rainwater that falls on his land. Common sense would say Gary has every right to have ponds with water on his 170 acres of land, but not common sense has been all but abandoned in the state of Oregon. Much like California, Oregon is increasingly becoming a collectivist state. You didn't build that. The government built that. You don't own that. The government owns that. That rainwater that just fell on your land, that's the government's rainwater, and you're going to jail if you try to steal from the government. That's the explanation from Jackson County officials. As crazy as it sounds, Jackson County officials initially granted Harrington permits to build ponds back in 2003. Yes, in Oregon, you actually need to beg for permission from the government just to have a pond on your own land. But the state of Oregon revoked his permits a few years later after he had already created the ponds, thus putting Harrington in the position of being a water criminal who was stealing rainwater from the state. Tom Paul, administrator of the Oregon Water Resources Department, is an obedient water Nazi. He insists, and I'll quote him, Oregon law that says all the water in the state of Oregon is public water, and if you want to use that water, either to divert it or to store it, you have to acquire a water right from the state of Oregon before doing that activity. What he means, of course, is not that the water is public water, but that it's government water. The government owns it, and if you steal from the government by, for example, collecting rainwater off your own roof, you will go to jail. Thus, even when the rainwater falls on your own property, you don't own it. The government owns it. You didn't build that. The government built that. That's not your land. You only lease it from the king. And by the way, your property tax is due again. Harrington said that he will never stop fighting the government on this issue. As reported in CNS News, when something is wrong, you just, as an American citizen, you have to put your foot down and say, this is wrong. You just can't take away any more of my rights. And from here on in, I'm going to fight it. If states claim they own the rain, they may soon claim to own the sunlight as well. Rainwater, turns out, isn't the only thing that falls on your land. Sunlight also falls on your land. Air resides above it and minerals below it. If the state of Oregon already claims to own all the water that falls on your land, what's to stop them from claiming ownership over all the sunlight? Imagine a day when the state erects solar panels on your land, but the electricity isn't yours to keep. You still have to pay for it because the sunlight belongs to who? The state. That's right. Get it? If you erect your own solar panels on your own land, the state could then arrest you and charge you with stealing state property. All those photons you see belong to the state. Once the state declares sunlight to become community property, you instantly become a criminal for having solar panels on your house. State of Oregon declares war on permaculture and sustainable living. Collecting rainwater and sunlight are practices taught in sustainable living, permaculture, and throughout the green movement. Rainwater capture using ponds and swales is one of the most important strategies for restoring a local landscape. These rainwater capture practices help trees grow more quickly and accelerate the return of animal life to any region. They can even be used to restore a desert into a lush food-producing forest. Capturing rainwater also reduces the burden on groundwater supplies and municipal water systems. Capturing rainwater actually protects aquifers, and raises the value of land, of course, which results in higher property tax revenues for the county. That Jackson County officials actually criminalize permaculture practices is aberrant, not only to the green movement on the left, but also the libertarians and constitutionalists on the right. Much like in California, Oregon County officials are lying, power-hungry tyrants who falsely accuse Harrington of diverting stream water when, in reality, he was only capturing water that normally flows off of his property and later joins the stream. Water law is water law, whether you agree with it or not, and that's the attitude of Jackson County Water Master Larry Minter, the water Nazi. He says the law is the law, whether you agree with it or not. In other words, the power of the state is absolute, even if the state departs from the realm of sanity. Importantly, if the state of Oregon can claim ownership over rainwater, what's to stop the state from claiming ownership over the air? To clarify, Oregon state bureaucrats are claiming they own the runoff water from rainwater that falls on your own land. Some of the communist-minded critics who are defending state officials in this case are lying and trying to claim that this man dammed a stream, implying it was a stream that ran through his property. That is a lie. All this man did was dam up his own runoff water, which dumps into a stream. Thus, he only captures his own rainwater. He takes no water from anywhere else, and when his own ponds are filled, that rainwater overflows directly into the stream where it's used to flow before he built his dams. This practice of capturing rainwater has been used throughout the history of civilization to restore landscapes, preserve soil, grow food, and live more sustainably. Do not fall for the disinformation campaigns being waged on this issue by the Oregon communists and socialists who believe no individual has any right to anything. What if Oregon claims ownership over the air you breathe? If the state of Oregon can claim it owns the water that falls on your land, then it can also just as easily claim over the sunlight that falls on your land. There's absolutely nothing stopping Oregon or any other state from producing or proclaiming air as state property. If you breathe it, you owe the state money. The fees would be small at first, perhaps $10 a month, but over time they would be raised to exorbitant levels. It's like a state-run shakedown after all. And once the people become apathetic enough to allow the state to expand its power beyond all reason, There's no limit to the state's desire for total control over everything under the sun, even including the sun and the air. This is not a difficult matter for the state to achieve. Oregon could simply pass a new law declaring all air that exists within the state boundaries to be state property. Those who divert air by engaging in activities such as inflating balloons or compressing air and storing it in air tanks would be given jail sentences. Think this couldn't happen? Think it's too stupid to say? It's no more stupid than what's already happening, the criminalization of capturing rainwater, a common permaculture practice for sustainable living. I'm Michael Wordsworth. We'll be back in a moment. Thank you for listening to today's Breaking Down the News. We're heading up close to the top of the hour. Going to squeeze in a couple more articles. And then we're out of here. I'll be back Wednesday at 3:30.
You're listening to RiverWestRadio.com. When you're out on the road, you want to know them tires are touching the pavement. You want rubber to concrete. When you're out there, you want to drive knowing that you're in control of the wheel. Well, what about your government? Don't you think your government should have its reality check and the rubber hit the pavement? What's going to put the brakes on the rampant fiscal spending, budget problems? It's not the voter, it's not the constituents, it won't be the leaders. The problem ain't the leaders, it's the followers. Get behind the wheel, America. Are you tired of commercials always telling you that you're tired? When you know you're tired because you wake up early and go to bed late, and every moment in between is spent trying to figure out how you're going to make the next dollar. Well, you're not alone. Millions of Americans are walking around in a sleep-deprived, zombie-like state, amplified by psych meds and pharmaceuticals found in the drinking water. So just be glad you're not one of them, unless you are. In which case, I'm sorry you had to hear this. But wait, there's more. If we keep at this current pace, we will surely lose our democratic republic and soon be standing in food lines for the poisonous rations the new totalitarian government will hand out. Don't delay. Get involved. Get informed.
Why are Republicans calling to disarm the American people? It's usually not the case. And while you have the federal government arming itself to the teeth against the conservatives, meanwhile, typically from the right side, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it the right wing that are big on Second Amendment rights and are really against disarming the American public? Oddly enough, the recent deluge of attacks against the Second Amendment were completely predictable in the aftermath of the Colorado massacre. But what perhaps wasn't so expected was the fact that a lot of them have come from so-called Republicans. Although normally aligned with the right to keep and bear arms, over the last week, numerous self-proclaimed conservatives have proven themselves to be wolves in sheep clothing. The most recent rhetorical assault on gun rights came yesterday, courtesy of Reagan appointee and so-called intellectual anchor of the Supreme Court's conservative wing, Justice Antonin Scalia. Appearing on Fox News Sunday, Scalia said that the Second Amendment leaves room for certain types of weapons to be regulated. This quote, Scalia told host Chris Wallace, "It will have to be decided in future cases," adding that they had some limitations on the nature of arms that could be borne when the Constitution was signed. Scalia's remarks prompted outrage from conservatives who accused him of selling out to the political left. Other luminaries on the political right did not wait long before joining their contemporaries on the left to call for gun rights to be restricted. Within 48 hours of the Batman shooting, media mogul Rupert Murdoch, labeled a GOP kingmaker in the United States, voiced his support for restricting the Second Amendment, tweeting, he put this out on Twitter, "We have to do something about gun controls." Similarly, in several shows broadcast in the days following the Colorado massacre, Fox News host Bill O'Reilly
has repeatedly advocated the creation of a national database of gun owners. I mean, this is bizarre. You guys know who Bill O'Reilly is, right? I'm not liking the guy myself. I mean, how could you? But, I mean, he's supposed to be from the right. He's the one that tells all the poor elderly Republicans that everything's okay in the Republican Party. He's a sellout. And he's repeatedly advocated the creation of a national database of gun owners, currently prohibited by federal law, joining the likes of Piers Morgan, Michael Moore, and Michael Bloomberg in savaging the Second Amendment. What's happening here when you have right-wing Republicans moving left? It's hard to say what's right or left anymore. I'm confused. Are you? Weekly Standard editor Bill Kristol also reacted to the Aurora shooting by calling for a reinstatement of the assault weapons ban. He was joined by talk radio host Michael Savage, who, despite modeling himself as one of the Obama administration's most ardent critics, also advocated reintroducing the ban. Michael Savage calls for gun control? What is this world coming to? With so-called conservatives like this, who needs liberals? Given the fact that virtually all the names mentioned above are ardent supporters of Mitt Romney, who signed into law an assault weapons ban while governor of Massachusetts, in addition to making repeated public statements about supporting strict gun control laws in order to provide for our safety, whoever wins the presidential election, the next 4 years are going to be a battle for gun rights activists. It's ironic that while many conservative and Republican icons have joined the political left in exploiting the Colorado massacre to rhetorically ambush the Second Amendment, the federal government under the Obama administration is simultaneously arming itself to the teeth as part of preparations to deal with unruly Americans in the event of civil unrest. While the Department of Homeland Security puts out requests for riot gear to deal with civil unrest, during the upcoming RNC-DNC and presidential inauguration, the federal agency also recently awarded defense contractor ATK a deal to provide the DHS with 450 million rounds of bullets over a 5-year period. The Department of Homeland Security has also recently purchased a number of bulletproof checkpoint booths that include stop-and-go lights. Leading conservatives don't seem too fussed at the fact that the federal government is gearing up for violence as it targets politically active conservatives as domestic extremists. However, when it comes to calling for Americans to be disarmed and the Second Amendment to be eviscerated, the Republican establishment shows equal, if not greater zeal, than the left in rushing to blame tragedies such as the Aurora shooting on God-given rights enshrined in the very same Constitution that conservatives are supposed to uphold and cherish. I'm Michael Wordsworth. Thank you for listening to me today. This has been Breaking Down the News. Monday, July something or other. What are we at? July 20th? No, July 30th. Apologize. Ouch. Well, we're over halfway through 2012. I'm going to be here with you, bringing it live as it happens. Each day is a new page in history, isn't it? Thank you for listening. Take care and peace out there.